Hello everyone, I am the SportsWiz 101 and today I'll be giving you my predictions for the NFL, specifically the AFC. Now the rest of the NFL, the NFC, will be predicted next week. The week after that I'll be giving you my playoff predictions. And then after that the season will start, and this year, unlike most years, I'll be giving you my predictions week in and week out. So yeah, that to look forward to in the season. But for now, let's take a look at the AFC first with the AFC East. So the AFC East, I think, is one of the more intriguing divisions in the entire NFL. So let's start with the defending division champions, the Buffalo Bills, who are about as relevant as they've been since the 90s, when they went to 4 straight Super Bowls, but failed to win any of them. And I expect them to continue to remain relevant until Josh Allen isn't that good, but I don't expect it to happen for a while. Then you move on through the division, you have the New England Patriots. Now, one storyline that a lot of people were asking about going into last season was, who is more responsible for the Patriot dynasty? Brady or Belichick? Based on the results we've had so far, it's definitely Brady. But it's not like Belichick is going to take those results lying down. Instead, he went into free agency and was as aggressive as ever, getting as many good players as he could possibly get. Plus, that Patriot defense is going to have a bunch of people coming back who opted out of last season. So this should be a better Patriot team. And then you have the Dolphins. So Miami, I think they would have made the playoffs last year if Ryan Fitzpatrick had been the quarterback the entire season. Fortunately, he was not, and Fitzpatrick is no longer in Miami. He is now the quarterback with Washington, so it's officially Tua time in Miami. And Miami, look, their offense was at best mediocre when Tua was the quarterback last season. So they needed to get him some help, and to their credit, they did. In Will Fuller. Granted, Fuller will be out the first week or so of the season due to a PAD suspension. But I do think this Miami offense should be better. Question is, will it be good enough to get the Dolphins into the playoffs, unlike it was last season? And then you have the Jets. Alright, the Jets should still suck, but I think they're going to be a little better. Last year they were able to suck enough to the 2 seed. This year probably get the 5th overall pick in the NFL draft. So what do I think about the teams? What order would I put them in? I think the Bills win the division again, followed by Miami, then New England, and then the Jets. Of these 4 teams, the only one I see making the playoffs is Buffalo, and I got them as the 2 seed in the AFC. So with that, let's move on to the AFC North. So, next up is the AFC North. Let's start with the 2 teams I don't expect to be in the division race. Those 2 would be the Steelers and Bengals. Now, with the Bengals, look, I try to keep bias out of all of these, and aside from my favorite teams, the Bengals are probably the team most in danger of having some bias attached to them. And that's mainly because I looked at their decision to draft Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell as a horrible freaking decision. I obviously would have rather taken Sewell. Bengals elected to take Chase instead. Then again, the Bengals do have a relatively tough schedule, playing the Ravens, Browns, and Steelers. Those games are always tough. But then you also throw in the defending 2-time AFC champions Kansas City, and they also have a game with Green Bay. San Francisco also on the schedule. So yeah, it's going to be a tough schedule for Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Nonetheless. Alright, so looking at the Steelers now, I think they're headed for an era of mediocrity, especially if Big Ben stays for a long time. He's already staying for this year. Who knows how longer he will stay with them, but I think the Steelers are going to be very mediocre. In fact, they are incredibly in jeopardy of having their first losing season in the Mike Tomlin era. I think I saw something that said that the Steelers, they have the longest active streak of winning seasons. And I think that very likely could end this coming season. Now, then you got the top two teams in this division, Cleveland and Baltimore. They're both teams that can very effectively run the ball down your throat. But the way I will differentiate between the two of them is I think Cleveland actually has more depth in the passing game than Baltimore does, and I think that puts Cleveland a step ahead of Baltimore. Well, how do I think that? Because I think Odell Beckham is probably the best receiver in the Cleveland lineup. And as we saw last year, they don't really miss a beat when they're missing Odell. Now, what about Baltimore? What happens when they're missing their top receiver? Well, let's see. You could go one of two ways with who the top receiver for the Baltimore offense is. Either Sammy Watkins or Hollywood Brown. For me, I'll go Sammy Watkins. And we saw last year that this Raven pass offense, not exactly that good when they don't have Sammy Watkins in there. And with the Ravens, they're more likely than not going to have to play some game without Sammy Watkins. Now, whether that game is a bunch of them in the middle of the season, some towards the beginning, some towards the end, I don't know for sure, but I am expecting Watkins to have to miss some game due to an injury, but that being said, Cleveland, I think, gets the 3 seed. Baltimore, I think, makes the playoffs as the 5 seed. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati will both miss the postseason. So that brings us over to the AFC South. Alright, in the AFC South, again, we'll go from last to first. Alright, so Houston Texans. Let's face it, if you guys do not wind up with a top 5 pick in this year's draft, then you can basically thank God for the miracle he just gave to you. That's all I need to say about Houston at this point. Of course, I'm not expecting Deshaun Watson to play, so. Moving on, Jacksonville. So, do you remember what the Panthers did last year? Below average team with a bunch of games that they were at least competitive in, but they never could quite get the big victory. I expect something similar for Jacksonville this season. Somewhere in the area of 5 to 6 wins, though you're competitive in a lot more games than the 6 you actually do win. So that leads us to the 2 teams I do think are competitive in this division, the Titans and the Colts. So, when the Colts trade for Carson Wentz, my gut instinct was, alright, this will be the year that Carson Wentz has his best statistical season, at least since 2017, when he was in the MVP race. And then the Titans trade for Julio Jones. And that trade for Julio pushed the Titans up to the favorites, my favorites, for the AFC South. Now, that doesn't mean I think the Titans are going to be top contenders in the AFC. I only have them as the 4 seed. Their defense, to me, just leaves too much to be desired to push them any higher than the 4 seed, but I do think the Titans win their division. I think they get the 4 seed. And if you're keeping track of the seeds I'm giving these teams so far, you'll know that that will mean the Titans and Ravens would meet up in the playoffs again for the 3rd year in a row. As for the Colts, I do think they make the postseason. And they will be the 7th seed in the postseason, which again, if you're keeping track of the seeds, that means the Colts, for the 2nd year in a row, would travel to Buffalo in the wild card round. Which those two would be very interesting. But yeah, Titans first, Colts second, Jaguars third, Texans fourth. So moving on, AFC West. Moving on to the AFC West. This is the division that I'm probably going to be the most biased in because it has my favorite team. You see, I am a Chiefs fan. So, if there's any bias, it's probably coming from this division. But on the other hand, it could also mean that I know more about this division than just about any other division in football. That being said, let's talk about my favorite team, the Kansas City Chiefs. We're getting to the point with the Chiefs where you're going to have to prove that they're not the best before you have to prove they are the best. Just a few years ago, like say in 2017, you might have to say, oh, well, they're definitely the best because of this, this, and that. But at this point, they don't really have to prove anything. It's almost like they're the definite best team in at least their division. And really, that opinion should be anyone's, I think, until someone proves otherwise. So, if there's anyone, though, that's going to knock off the Chiefs this year, I think it's the Chargers. If anyone keeps the Chiefs from winning the division, it's the Chargers. I mean, that defense, I'll be honest, it's probably given Mahomes more trouble than any defense in the division that Mahomes has seen. Mahomes typically hasn't really struggled against the Raiders. Broncos, he'll still light them up still, but the Chargers, they tend to be one of the tougher defenses Mahomes will face. And this is a defense that's going to be getting Derwin James back. And Derwin, so long as he stays healthy, is going to be one of the better safeties in football. And you can't forget about that offense, now quarterbacked by last year's Rookie of the Year, Justin Herbert. Some would say he didn't really deserve that, and it should have gone to Justin Jefferson. I can see where those people are coming from. But I still think Justin Herbert, so far at the very least, the best rookie quarterback in last year's class. So, I do think both the Chiefs and Chargers make the postseason. Then you look at the Broncos and Raiders. First up, Denver. If only you had a quarterback. That's been the story of the Broncos since 2015. If only you had a quarterback. Ever since Peyton Manning retired, that is the statement you have heard. And then you have the Raiders. It seems obvious to me, Raiders are not fighting to win today. They're more trying to make sure they win like 5 years from now. In fact, I believe I saw a quote from John Gruden that especially said that the Raiders aren't really trying to win today. So, that makes me think Raiders probably the basement dwellers in the AFC West this season. So, like I said, Raiders fourth. It's going to be Broncos third, Chargers second, Chiefs 1. Chiefs are going to have home field in the AFC, while the Chargers are going to take the wild card spot I have not given to anyone, which is the 6th seed, which means the Chargers will have a visit to Cleveland coming up, which I think will be an excellent playoff contest should it actually happen. So, to recap, the playoffs, home field belongs to Kansas City, and then the wild card playoffs would be the Colts would travel to Buffalo, the Chargers would travel to Cleveland, and the Ravens would travel to Nashville to play the Titans. So, those are my predictions for the AFC. If you like them, please like this video and subscribe. I've been the Sports Wiz 101, and I'll see you next week when I predict the NFC.